Okay, great. We're recording.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first meeting in July for the Affordable Housing Ordinance Working Group. Seeing as that there are no public comments submitted for today's meeting, we'll move on to the second item on the agenda, which is to consider options for updating the Affordable Housing Ordinance, which will include establishing consensus on the goal. What are we trying to achieve? Under that, you can consider cash contributions for residential development, adjustments to the existing formula, alternative methods related to the on-site unit calculation, or commercial development contributions. To that point, we do have a presentation prepared for tonight's meeting, and afterwards we will further on continue with the meeting. So first, the question is, what is the goal we're trying to achieve through recalibration of the cash contribution? So throughout this process, we've talked a lot about what we think the goal of this should be, or rather, what things should we include as we move forward with this process. There are a few items I think that are particularly relevant today, and that is to first and foremost deal with the imbalance between the amount of money received in form of cash contributions versus the other options presented within the framework of the Affordable Housing Ordinance. And correcting that imbalance, I think, should be the main priority of this working group. That we can move on to the next slide. Oh, Joe, let me see here.
Brian, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, so I have sound, which is good, but I don't have visuals or anything. And I don't need to see the faces, but the slides, I guess I'm not seeing the slides.
Yeah, no problem. Let me see here.
I'm seeing the slides. Is anybody else not seeing the slides?
No, I'm seeing them, but I would like if everyone could be able to see them. So I believe the slides were sent out yesterday to everyone. So if possible, you can follow along there. The same materials are being used from the slides that were sent on June 30th. So there's no separate material other than those. But I think first, before we perhaps move to the next slide, are there any questions around kind of setting the ground floor level concept here? I know there are a number of things we discussed in our last meeting, and a lot of great ideas have been considered as ways to provide incentives to developers and create alternative means of increasing affordable housing contributions. But I think first and foremost, we should work on simply recalibrating the formula for cash contributions, and then on the back end, consider some of the more secondary aspects to the policy. Yes, Mary.
Sorry, I'm a little slow. So Brian, and I missed last meeting, so I apologize for that in advance, but so is it the goal of the group to bring parity to the four choices? Is that what we're saying the goal is? So regardless of whether it brings more money into the pot, the goal is to sort of right size these choices so that they're more legitimate choices than they appear to be today among them.
I would say that's a fair depiction of the the goal here. I think in doing so, in trying to recalibrate the cash contribution level through the number of means made clear earlier, we will be increasing the amount of AHIP contributions as a function of that. Now, whether that leads to a boom in CAFs being created, I think is yet to be seen. But I think increasing the amount of AHIP contributions is a good in and of itself. Oh, Joe. Yes, Joe, I will forward those to you right now, the slides. So give me one moment. Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think having a sense that what's happening now is unbalanced, right? Is kind of the undercurrent behind a lot of what's going on. And the goal is to, as you said, bring things more into parity as was initially intended when the ordinance was created, because of a number of economic and historical trends over the last 20 years. We've seen one of these options be disproportionately favored compared to the others. And so our goal is simply to attempt to recalibrate that and bring these options into relative parity so as to offer a near equal choice between the four options.
So I see Matt's got his hand up, and I'm sure he's going to say something really helpful. But let me just offer one additional thing then. So if one goal is to have parity among, or closer to parity, return to parity is how I would say this, the original kind of parity that existed. That's one goal. The other context for this, in my view, is what are developers able to afford in projects in other jurisdictions?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't personally, and I did a lot of these, I voted on a lot of these. I don't have a sense of that. Maybe Matt does. I also don't have a sense of how, we used to say, if you sometimes in school stuff, like you can raise the average if you lower the top, right? If you bring the standard down. So that's not our goal, is
Right.
not to make things less, but I really think the context of what's happening, what people are paying for affordable housing in other jurisdictions should be part of our consideration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sorry, I don't want to keep going on. I want other people to speak, but that was something of a topic in our last meeting covered by some of the representatives from Navajo, which is that the ways in which Fairfax and Alexandria do their affordable housing ordinance are uniquely different than how Arlington does ours. That's not to say that theirs is better per se, but there are certain methods and standards that they use that we do not use. For example, I believe it was Alexandria, and please, someone correct me if I'm wrong, where their affordable housing ordinance incentivizes more building with wood up to a certain level, whereas we're looking for more, concrete high-rise style. So as we're looking at this, we have to see, is this an apples to apples comparison or is it not? So that's one thing to consider. But I do agree we should be looking at this regionally just to get a sense of what is being done, what is possible, but we also have to contextualize it for Arlington too.
Right, but what I'm interested in is a per unit cost. Mm-hmm. Regardless of all the puts and takes and everybody's policy vagaries, there's a dollar amount that they crank into when they're penciling it. And the question is, how does that dollar amount compare to our dollar amount?
Right.
Given the vagaries of it. So I'm going to be
Yes.
quiet now.
No,
Thank
that's a
you
good
for
point.
humoring me.
No, thank you. I think it's something we should consider as we attempt to recalibrate the formula, right? We should be thinking about what is feasible, right? And that will take a regional view, but also take a view, as you said earlier, from the developer community. So with that, I'll turn over to Matt.
Well, thanks, Brian. And just more of a process question. So is at the end of the day, the goal that we're discussing right here going to be used in like a report that we're generating? Is it going to be in writing? Because if it is, I think it should be, we should have a more deliberative process for reviewing it than just talking out loud and just reviewing the language. So what's the process here?
Right. So fundamentally, we would have a more deliberative process within the next few weeks. So this is first and foremost to discuss what our inclinations are as to what direction we should be taking this. Of course, there are certain intricacies here that we're not going to accomplish tonight, right? We're not going to be able to get to the bottom of everything within an hour. But I think beginning to have a sense of what direction we should be moving in is important, just so as we can give a sort of pathway forward. Because first and foremost, we have to know at least the set of policies that we would want to exclude, right? So we have a few options in front of us, and as we move forward through the presentation, we'll be able to, I think, have a better understanding of some of the key concepts underpinning the AHO design, and we can have further conversation as to what we would envision a fuller conversation to look like, is to get to a place where we're comfortable proposing an overall policy, because that's the end point of this, right? That by August, September, we'll have a concrete deliverable, which we'll be able to present to the Housing Commission. So with that, I'd like to move on to the next slide. Okay.
Right, Brian. So I was going to walk through just some background before the next question. So just to remind everybody the basics of the ordinance, the four options that the ordinance provides is on-site units that's calculated at 5% of the gross floor area above the first floor area ratio, or offsite nearby, offsite anywhere, which kind of derive from that first one. And then the fourth, which is the topic of most of our discussion, that cash contribution, which is a tiered contribution based on the total gross floor area. So some key concepts underpinning the Affordable Housing Ordinance cash contribution design. These aren't written down in the ordinance, but kind of the lore handed down. I think some of this came through in our meeting in April with the panel, that the affordable housing contributions, they're levied on development, the development that's beyond the by right development potential. So it's what's additional. And so as a proxy for that by right potential, the ordinance and the state code established that first 1.0 floor area ratio is subtracted from how we calculate the unit contribution. That's important. And then when we get to the cash contribution, that the rates are tiered and they increase with the floor area ratio. And here's those tiers. There's 3 tiers. Basically, everybody pays on that first FAR. And then from 1 to 3 FAR, there's a higher rate, and then a rate that's double that for above 3.0 FAR. And these are readjusted every year based on the consumer price index for this area. Just Going back, a little review from last month, we reviewed the results of recent analysis regarding the value differential between on-site affordable dwelling units and market rate units. The valuation of this foregone revenue, it's essentially the cost to the developer for providing affordable dwelling units on site, which we know hardly ever happens. But it tells us what that gap is. What we saw was that the analysis was done in 2021. There was a differential of $291,000, or about 200% higher, or that's 3 times as much as the actual cash contributions. And then based on the projects between 2021 and 25, due to a number of factors, that the differential actually went down due to a lower cap rate and increasing AMIs faster than the CPI during that period. But still, the result was that the differential was about 100%, or that the contribution would need to be twice as much to be at parity with what the value of that on-site unit costs to the developer through foregone revenue. So we looked also, just for some background, to at applying today's rate to all the site plan projects that have been approved, going back to 2005. And then selected a few out just for illustrative purposes. And these are kind of selected based on FAR. So to see how we get different outcomes by the FAR, saying the FAR is critical in both for the affordable dwelling unit contribution, as well as for the calculation of how much affordable dwelling units. And I think what's instructive is the affordable dwelling unit. What's in that formula doesn't give you a unit; it gives you a square foot amount. And so, at the end of the day, it's a square foot. So at the low end, we had a project that only had 270 square foot requirement. But because they're paying on that full first one FAR, and they had a very low cap on what that base density was, it yielded a very high contribution per square foot of affordable dwelling unit, as well as for the unit. So it's interesting that it goes from a very high rate, $313,000 for a very low FAR, and then it goes down at 2.0 to 118,000, and then it increases as we have that higher tier is kind of averaging out with that first FAR, and it goes up until we get to the higher levels at 6.4 FAR with Met Park for $211,000. So the results from applying that 2025 rate to all site plans, if we looked at all the site plans in the history of the ordinance and calculated it at today's rate, so we don't have the distortions from inflation. So real dollars, not nominal dollars. The average contribution per affordable dwelling unit square foot is $195, and the average contribution per affordable dwelling unit would be $165,000, 166, let's call it. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Brian. Hopefully that helps to think about things, but happy to clarify anything if need be.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions about that presentation? Yes, Alice.
We can't hear you.
Alice, doesn't seem like you're muted, but we can't hear you. Nope, still can't hear you, unfortunately. Oh, well, in the meantime, but I'll figure that out, and let's look at the current point of discussion, which is the method that we're using right now to calculate the contributions that are based on the table below, as discussed earlier by Russell. So the question I want to pose to the group based upon the information that we've just heard. Oh, yes, Mary. Mary, you're still on
I'm
mute?
on mute, sorry.
Okay.
Russell, can you go back one slide? No, one more, sorry. So what this makes me think, and I remember that Pershing Drive project, and I remember being shocked at the time. It was one of the very early ones I voted on, at the level of community benefit that we were layering onto this relatively small project. It seemed really out of whack. And so I'm going to say this just because I'm not sure that just tweaking on the top or tweaking the fourth option is the right thing to do. If those four options, when Melissa and company created them, had some relative relationship to each other, then I would say it's all out of whack. And I would say that, you know, maybe we need to go up and down from 170,000 and think of that at the lower end on smaller projects, we might reduce the burden. And that at the upper end, we might find a way to bring it closer to parity. But that's my reaction to this, prompted partly by the fact that I remember that Pershing Drive project so clearly.
Yeah, and if I might, of the projects here and of the projects of those 65 that we looked at, you know, very few provided on-site units. Generally, if there was a special affordable housing protection district involved, but Pershing Drive on this table, that's the one project that actually did provide an on-site unit in response to the ordinance, and this table kind of tells you why.
Right, it's totally unaffordable to do it.
Yeah, I think in addition to Mary, I think Alex actually posted a question in the chat. So I don't know, Russell, if you could address that before we move on. She asked if I'm not sure which slide Alice is referring to, but she's asking if it showed that each AHIF contribution averages 30,000 less per value of unit versus an actual unit.
Yeah, no, it actually, let me go back, and we looked at this last week. There's a number of ways of looking at it, but here this shows the average contribution being 165, applying today's rate to all projects throughout history. But here's probably the more salient slide. What's you know, the value of the foregone revenue, the difference between that rent restricted rent and the market rent, what the value of that is per unit. Basically, as of 2025, it was about a little bit less than $300,000, $294,000, while we were receiving about 150 on that group. Remember that group was the group where we were we were looking at just the 2021 to 25 units in that. So that's it. I don't know if that clarifies things, Alice, but I hope so.
Okay. And Mary, is that another question, or is your hand still up? Okay, I just want to make sure. I don't want to skip over you. So, Russell, if you don't mind, can you kind of give a little bit more information just on some of the methods that you had suggested at our previous meetings? I believe that actually one of your options fits fairly closely to what Mary was enunciating earlier, of trying to reduce the burden on smaller developments while capturing still some of the AHIP contribution from larger ones.
Sure, I can go ahead with that, and then we can either circle back to this because there's two methods basically that we have on the table tonight. So I'll just continue then. So we talked earlier about the four methods of compliance, and we're really interested kind of of making more commensurate, number one, that on-site unit, which is based on a percentage of the gross floor area to the cash contribution, which is based on the total floor area without netting out the FAR. And I think um, that's a key difference. So all the other methods all tear off of taking that first FAR out. And the fourth one for the cash contribution, we include that in and have the complete gross floor area of the building without that exclusion. And with those tiers. And the intent of that, from my understanding of what I've heard, is so that smaller projects have less of a burden than bigger projects. But when we graph out or chart what that model actually looks like, the current method, for projects that have a scantly above 1.0 FAR, the burden is really high. It's not till you get to closer to 2 FAR that it comes down, and that's because we've included that whole first floor area. So if it's 100,000 square foot site, that first 100,000 square feet, you're paying on that even if you just have another 1,000 or 2,000 square feet. I mean, there's very few site plans. There's about 3 that have this really minimal FAR, but it's important because if the intention was to not harm and to make it easier for smaller site plan developments, the impact of that tiered structure that includes the first FAR really does the opposite. And wanted to hone in on this. So if we hone in, then without that below 1.3 FAR, it kind of, you take out that extreme, but you can still see it goes from a pretty high rate and then dipping down until that third tier kicks in at 3.0. Mind you, the average contribution per affordable dwelling unit per square foot of what would be required through the on-site is $195 per square foot, more or less. And so we see where it's under in some places and over, and that's to be just at parity with the current requirement. I wanted to go back here. Again, so that tells you why that Pershing Drive was really expensive and really expensive on a per square foot basis, and then the per square foot drops as the FAR goes up. To the NSTA project, $180 a square foot. The Clarendon Square, when you get to 3.0, 155, which will be the lowest it will be. And this would be true for any project at 3.0 FAR, under today's rates. So, and that's what the graph shows, that you'd be at 155 at this point, and then it goes up from there. And this doesn't even speak to the undervaluation and the disparity between the two methods. So another thing we looked at, just as another point of interest, we do know the value per square foot of providing affordable housing on site, because when we do the bonus density, and these are examples from recent and a forthcoming bonus project with bonus density, we do evaluation on that, and because we have a sum of money for community benefits, and that's parsed out between the various community benefits that there are. And so we know on a square foot value how much it's costing. So it's about $309 a square foot for Shirlington House, for one bedroom. We'll look at the average values, I'm sorry, over here, because we look at 1 and 2 bedrooms. But for projects outside the metro corridors, they tend to be lower, a little bit above $300 a square foot. For projects in the metro corridors, generally you're looking at 400 or above. 2050 Wilson might be a little bit of an outlier there, but it lets us know what that value per square foot of an affordable unit really is. What's the cost to provide that? And so an alternative method that could be considered for deriving a cash contribution would be to directly link that cash contribution calculation to the calculation for on-site affordable dwelling units. So option 1 calculates the square footage requirement of the affordable dwelling units, the 5% of the FAR, so that gives us a square footage. The resulting square footage would be multiplied by a certain amount to determine the cash contribution, and that would get a more even result along projects despite their varying sizes or their FAR. Everybody would pay a flat rate. The potential benefits of an alternative method would be that it ties directly to that first requirement, and both our ordinance and the state code kind of set that first option as the default option, or what you shall do. But there are other alternatives, I think is what the state code says. So the standard really is that first option. This using a model that ties directly to the ADU requirement would create a more consistent outcome as well, regardless of project size, and wouldn't create a greater burden on smaller developments. So that's what I have for you, and then back to you all for discussion or questions.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to put that in front of everyone because Mary's comment, I think, really kind of is a great kickoff point for that part of the discussion of thinking of a alternative model present that doesn't necessarily burden smaller development, but as put forward earlier, reconsiders how we are looking at the affordable housing ordinance in a way that it perhaps hasn't been managed in the past. So I'd like to open up this to conversation for the group and to get a sense of what your opinions are on this potential alternative to the current affordable housing ordinance model. I saw Matt's hand up earlier, but I'm not sure if you're interested in commenting on this.
No, it was about something else. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Jason.
Yeah, I think to me it really depends on what the type of 4.1 plans we're going to get in the future, because especially when we do the new comprehensive plan, and there could be opening up to floor area ratios much higher than what we're doing on metro corridors, but then we could see some bus corridors where I don't know, are we going to get like a lot of plans with like 2 FAR, like, or base density? It just depends what the map is like and what the base densities are going to be looking like, because I could see example in Clarendon and points west from Roslyn Ballston corridor where we could have a lot higher base densities. But I could see also in other areas where we have like lower, like say, I just don't know. It just depends on what the future holds in terms of, are we going to get a lot of higher base density site plans coming in line, or is it going to be, lower? So.
Now I did too. Yes, Mary.
Okay, so again, Russell, I cannot absorb this that quickly. I'm sorry. Can you go back a little bit further? So I guess my question, let me see if I can crystallize my question. So in some ways, to me, saying this is the price has a great deal of appeal. How we would settle on that price is really what the question is. And how that price might accelerate over time as construction costs and things change, that's like another question. But to me, the issue, if I'm, one of Matt's clients, I want predictability. I want to limit this negotiation. I want to be able to put it in and know that that's the deal. And so the question I have is, like, if we took your proposal, Russell, for the alternative method, and we plug in some numbers for what that regular payment, what that fixed payment would be above X, and I don't know if it's, we exclude the first 1.0 or we exclude the first 1.5. I don't know, because there's that dip below until you get to 3 and then it pushes back up. But nonetheless, if you plug that in, how does that compare to what they're doing now? And on what basis could we say this is a good thing it's a good thing for the community to have more affordable housing, but it's dependent on folks being willing to build it. And I think Pershing Drive demonstrated it's not worth it to put on-site units. So how do we work? It's that spreadsheet put and take thing that is not my expertise at all.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that because my team's just collapsed on me. But I got the last of that. And yeah, if you were to put and that's how we got the 195. So if we were to put if you were to substitute the tiered approach with a flat rate that excludes the 1.0 FAR and is just based on the result of that square footage requirement that's calculated in option 1, it would be $195 and a couple cents per square foot. And that would get it based on all the projects that have come in, 65 projects over the last 20 years, it would produce the exact same result. We'd get the same amount of money. So we would, if we want to make that more commensurate with what we know the actual value of the unit is, we'd have to, raise it above that. But that, and this is where the information I think that that Alex pulled together based on density bonus, because we negotiate for density bonus based on the value, what it's costing the developer to provide that. So if it costs the developer this much per square foot to provide an affordable dwelling unit as bonus density, that's the same amount that it really costs them to provide an affordable dwelling unit on site as part of the base density, because it's a unit in the same building. It really doesn't, it's not. So this is kind of instructive. And so if we're at 195 is what we would be to get the same result or same outcome as we're getting today. If we want it to be equal to the value of the unit, of that on-site unit, it would need to be close to $300 a square foot, or higher. And then there's a question if location matters and if there's a way to weave in location, because the Hotel Pentagon, Shirlington House, those aren't metro accessible sites, and they've got a much lower value. I'm not sure why 2050 Wilson has such a lower value, but there tend to be anomalies and outliers and everything. So I don't know if that helps, and I understand this is a new concept. You're probably gonna have to sit with it for a while and think about it, and I get it. It's difficult to react right away, but I appreciate your thoughts there. Ryan.
Oh, you're on mute.
Matt, you also have your hand up, Matt.
Yeah, I think what would be helpful, and this is a lot to take in, what would be helpful is like maybe going back to first principles of what are we trying to achieve here, because the base AHIF contribution option that most developers choose, they choose in 999 times out of 100 for a reason, right? So the other three options, are they really options if they're never chosen, right? And if on-site committed affordable, that's typically in the bonus density discussion. So like it's not really apples to apples comparison saying, for base contributions, AHIF and on-site are, how do we create parity there? It's, the base contribution and then what do you have to do to get bonus density, which is typically through on-site CAF. So like going back to the base question is like, do we have a strong preference of increasing AHIF contributions, which then can be used by our nonprofit affordable housing developers, and we grow the AHIF pool and achieve more units that way? Or do we have a preference for more on-site units, right? Because those things are, I wouldn't say exactly apples and oranges, but they're in conflict with each other a bit, because the reason why you typically want to get on-site committed affordable units for bonus density is because they're more expensive, they're more burdensome, there's more procedure, there's more process involved in it, right? So I think we just have to decide, like, what are we aiming to achieve? Is it more AHIF, or is it more on-site units through market rate projects? I think that's going to help make a decision here.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Mary, we're about to say something?
Thinking.
Oh, sorry. So I think that's a great point. Oh, I see Greg has his hand up as well.
Yeah, thank you. And apologies, I also missed the last discussion, so this has been helpful in trying to catch up to some of the concepts as well. But I wanted to, respond to two questions as sort of the resident developer representative on the panel that have been posed over the course of the discussion. So I think one, going back to the beginning, comparing to other jurisdictions, what's unique about Arlington County is that the contribution or affordable housing impact is being assessed from everything above the 1.0 FAR, which is unusual. In most other jurisdictions, there is typically bonus density granted in exchange for the affordable housing set aside. And so this in Arlington County is starting at a much lower threshold typically. And so that's the cost of doing business in Arlington County, but just to point out that it is a cost that is unique and somewhat different to other jurisdictions. And then, Mary, I thought your point again was the right one to make about predictability and consistency relative to a shift to valuing this based on the community benefits negotiation, which does end up being project specific, and towards the end of the process that gets negotiated with county staff. And so that is a level of variability that can be uncomfortable and a challenge to absorb, and you're typically spending a lot of money to even get to that point. So and I say that community benefit negotiation is project specific, which has been our circumstances across numerous projects because it is based on a third party assessment of the square footage density of that particular site. And there are always nuances associated with the given site that tend to impact that appraisal one way or the other. Which does make it rational to some extent based on what the revenue potential of that site is, where it is, whether that's a higher income or rent generating portion of the county or not. So it does lend a little bit of a nexus to that calculation that I can see the appeal to, but again, it also is unique to the county in that the base cap on FAR on many sites is set fairly artificially low in this developer's opinion relative to what the comprehensive plan is suggesting is the targeted level of density for that site. And therefore that community benefits negotiation ends up being a pretty big number at the end of the day because of the amount of density that you're having to make up as above the baseline. And I use my current project in Roslyn as an example. The base or max available residential density there is a 4.8 FAR, and yet in the Roslyn sector plan, you're able to go up to a 10. So there was 5.2, more than double what the base available density was that we had to make up for in community benefits.
Just a question, Greg, if you don't mind kind of following that line of logic further. In your opinion, if you were to alter the base FAR amount that you're talking about that is somewhat artificially low in your estimation, what would be the interaction with that as it relates to the larger conversation we're having around the affordable housing ordinance? Do you think that'd be something that would perhaps help developers attain some level of predictability? Is there something that you think would be beneficial by tinkering with that?
Yes, I think potentially, and I think I wouldn't suggest that the development community would. I don't think the development community suggests that we shouldn't be required to pay for that additional density that would go along with raising that cap. And I think affordable housing is a very laudable goal to be used for that differential and that predictability. Should we be able to arrive at a reasonable, set calculation, I think would add that layer of certainty and predictability that we're talking about.
Okay. Eric, I see you also have your hand up.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Quick, maybe this is there for or maybe.
Oh, Eric, you're coming in and out. I can't hear you at all now. Nope.
There's been unique circumstances, Barkoff Apartments, other things, but what's the pipeline? The reason I'm asking is because, thinking about Matt's comments and question of like, what are we trying to do? I mean, to me, the goal has always been like, let's build more affordable housing, right? Like AHIPS is a tool to get us there versus, solely relying on on-site. So thinking about that, like if we had more means for funding right now, like, can you give me a ballpark of like how many projects might be kind of out there or like ready within a year or so to be requesting AHIF? Like, what's that look like? I'm not looking for specific projects, by the way. I'm just trying to get a sense of, are folks still clamoring to try to do projects in Arlington?
Sorry, Eric, the beginning part of your comments were kind of patchy. So are you directing that question to Matt?
No, sorry, this is to Russell or to Richard. What does the development pipeline look like for our affordable housing projects? Like, Do
The
we have?
pipeline is full.
Okay. So if we had more AHIF right now, theoretically, then we would be supporting more projects this year. Is that right?
Either this year or in subsequent
Or-
years, depending on the timeline for the specific projects.
Okay. All right. That was it. Thanks.
Yep. All right. Thank you. So I think that kind of gets to the heart of our conversation now, right? Which is there is a means by which we can build more affordable housing. And as expressed earlier by Matt, sometimes our goals may seem in conflict, but I think there actually is a fairly clear path, as Eric pointed out, which is obtain more AHIF resources, and you can fund more affordable housing projects, right? It need not be that you have a surplus of on-site caps if you are still able to obtain more affordable housing, perhaps off-site as well. Mary, yes.
So the whole thing about the bonus density and the on-site associated with bonus density goes back to a big conversation about do we make sure that we have some affordable housing in our major corridors? Because that's where, in the beginning, that's where all the bonus density was. It was in the RB corridor and Crystal City. Wasn't really on Columbia Pike. It was not about Lee Highway. It was the metro corridors. And this is a question I think that Michelle and I struggled with a little bit when we did the community foundation thing is, if you look at those per prices, those per unit or square foot prices that Russell put up for the bonus density, if you set the buyout so it was comparable to, so you could basically buy your way out of that bonus density requirement, just pay the money into AHIF, we would have quite a bit more money for AHIF. And the question I think we have to ask ourselves is would we rather have more money in AHIF, or would we rather have these sprinkled around units in these really big buildings in really expensive places?
And I don't mean to, I know Joe has his hand up, but I just also want to, get your sense of what your preference is on that question, right? Because I think you're putting your finger on an important equity question, right? Should we be prioritizing sprinkling affordable housing units in these expensive properties across the county as a means of increasing equity, or should we be dedicating more of our resources to obtaining more AHIF funds that we can apply to developing affordable housing, anywhere in the county?
Right. So Brian, I hate to be somebody who keeps saying, well, I want a little bit more data, but the reality is I'd like to know, specifically by node, how many units we've got in each of these places. Right. And I know, for instance, the church on Columbia Pike that redeveloped, well, that's on a lot of what has happened on the Pike is on really good transit. So, but it's also not gonna be, the 10 FAR. So I guess that's really, I don't know enough my gut tells me if we could sell it, if the contribution was comparable to what they were putting, to them putting it in the big building, that 9 times out of 10, I'd probably go for them being able to buy it out. But if they're in a place where there's very little, then maybe I want the 30-year contract that I might be willing to let lapse at refinancing and letting them buy out as a way to kind of like keep it. But when we finished the Columbia Pike plan, we had all of a sudden a huge rush. People had been waiting, and all of a sudden our numbers got worse, in the sense of the disproportion increased. among affordable and not affordable on the Pike. So, but
Right.
but yes, I actually do think we should think about what that would look like and whether there's any limitations we would put on based on what's available in Define the Watershed.
I see we have two questions. I know we're running up against time, so I want to be mindful of that. First, there's Joe and then Danny.
Yeah, hey, Brian, this is a great, the last 5 minutes has been worth the whole hour. It's been, I think we're getting at the crux. And I have a scope question. Are we just limited to development money, or can we use things for the county voucher program? Because if it were that, I would say you get more money, get more contributions rather than cap. And at least, and especially with the federal, if the federal government minimizes the housing choice vouchers, that we pump up our Arlington voucher assistance program. So I would opt for more contributions.
Richard or Russell, do you want to speak to that?
I'm happy to speak to it.
All right.
Go ahead, Mary. I'm not sure I understood the question. We certainly can, most of the housing choice voucher recipients and most of the housing grant recipients are people that are in CAFs. So the fact that we're creating CAFs, using our AHIP funds or through units being created through redevelopment, that's creating a resource for those people using the various grant programs.
Right, I understand that, but there's other rental supply in the county, and if people just need the money to pay the rent, they can use it anywhere. They can use it in my condominium. They can use it anywhere, depending on the fair market rents, et cetera.
Yeah, there's a maximum amount of assistance you can receive through housing grant and housing choice voucher. So you can't just get any unit. You can't, get a $5,000 one bedroom in Roslyn.
No, I understand that, but the fair market rents, et cetera. I understand that, but go on.
Joe, let me tell you why I don't support that. The reason is that the payments for AHIF, they're one-time payments. And when you bring somebody in and you give them a housing grant, you don't do it for 1 year. You do it for multiple years.
Right, and this is only limited. Yeah, I understand.
That's really my objection. Is this this is capital money in my opinion.
Okay, that was my question. If it's all capital, that's fine. Thank you.
All right, Danny.
So I think it's important to note in the context of comparing on-site CAFs versus AHIF contribution, the power of leverage that we have when it comes to the AHIF contribution and, working through the nonprofit housing developers to provide affordable housing, because we can leverage the funds with tax credits and other sources. So you end up providing additional housing to the community than you're going to get versus the on-site CAFs. So that's something to consider as well, not just the location, but also the sheer volume through the power of financial leverage. The other thing I'm very curious about, I second Mary's interest on sort of where the sprinkling of CAFs exist and, where our affordable housing stock is. But I would also add just sort of like what the sheer numbers are in the county and how successful this program has been versus other communities, and just maybe sort of on a per capita basis, just so we have something to kind of compare, because I tend to think that we're actually doing very well compared to our neighbors, but I'd like the data to support that.
Okay, I think that's something that we can try to procure before our next meeting. And before we depart, I do want to kind of align myself with comments made earlier by Eric and Alice around, the status of the affordability crisis here in Arlington, and some comments made back in our April meeting, I believe by, I think it was actually Russell. My memory is failing me, but I believe it was actually Jay Facette who said it, that his kind of epiphany later during his tenure on the county board was that, you know, having offsite units is as valuable as having on-site units. And so I believe it's important to value offsite units as much as on-site, and that, you know, very few units in Arlington generally, I believe, exist in the on-site capacity. I think the majority of CAFs are actually off-site. And so if we're looking at how to prioritize our investment, whether we go with greater AHIP contributions or trying to maximize the amount of on-site CAFs, I would suggest that we first, as both Mary and Danny have asked for, you know, obtain more data to see the density layout there and to evaluate how the program is working, but also to consider the possibility that increasing the amount of AHIP contributions, while perhaps not contributing to the question that Mary has raised about the amount of on-site caps that have been placed within luxury apartments, would still increase the amount of affordable housing generally within Arlington. So on that note, we will have another meeting in July, but between then, I will be in contact with staff and we'll try to get that data for you to further the conversation as we make our way towards coming up with a methodology for reforming the affordable housing ordinance. So thank you everyone for your time tonight, and I will see you all soon.
Thanks, Brian.
Good to see everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Brian.
Thank you.